There we go. I am recording now. Welcome back. Man, I love this book. Let me just see where I want to, leave off. Okay. We'll just see how much I want to read. I'm basing how much I want to read off the chapter names because I don't want the chapter names being really long when I write them down on my audio file or my video file. I mean, so, but they're all pretty much like 2 words or 3 words, at most like 4 words, but. Okay, so we shall we shall begin. All right. This next chapter is called Desperate Measures. Desperate Measures. If she needed evidence, things were different now. The food was enough. On days when Kyoshi had time to eat breakfast, she usually helped herself to a bowl of juke from the communal pot bubbling away in the kitchen, garnished with whatever dried out scraps from upstairs tables Auntie Mui deemed fit to save from the previous night. Today, another servant surprised her outside her door and led her to one of the dining halls reserved for guests. The room she sat in by herself was so big and empty that drinking her tea made an echo. The grand Zeton table held such an array of boiled, salted, and fried delicacies that she thought the place setting for one had to be a mistake. It was not. Without knowing which of the children under his roof was the Avatar, Jianzu seemed to have decreed that Kyoshi was to be fed like a noble until he figured it out. She tried to accommodate his generosity, but a small bite of each artfully arranged dish was all she could manage with her rice, including she noted with chagrin the spicy pickled kelp she carried to the house herself, now nestled in a lacquered saucer. Her waiter checked back in. "Is mistress finished?" she asked with a bowed head. "Rin, I went to your birthday party," Kyoshi said. "I chipped in for that comb you're wearing." The girl shrugged. You're not to show up for work anymore. Master Jianzu wants you by the training grounds in an hour. But what am I supposed to do until then? Whatever the mistress wishes. Kyoshi staggered out of the dining room like she'd taken a blow to the head. Leisure? What kind of animal was that? She didn't want anyone to see her up and she didn't want anyone to see her up and about the house. Oh, there's Kyoshi, taking in the flowers. Oh, there she goes now, pondering the new calligraphy from the air temple. The prospect of being on display horrified her. In lieu of a better option, she ran to the small library where she'd spoken to Kelsey and latched the door behind her. She hid there, alone with her dread until the appointed time came. Kyoshi was as unfamiliar with the flat stone expanse of the training ground as she would have been with the caldera a Fire Nation volcano. Her duties never brought her here. Jianzu waited in the middle of the courtyard for her, a scarecrow monitoring the field. Don't bother with that anymore, he said when she bowed deeply like a servant. Come with me. He led her into one of the side rooms, a supply chest that had been hastily emptied with its contents. Straw dummies and earth-bending discs had been tossed out without care outside, irking her sense of organization. Inside, Heiran waited for them. Kyoshi, she said with a warm smile. Thank you for humoring us. I know it's been a trying past couple of days for you. Kyoshi felt like there would be no end to the awkwardness. Despite her friendship with Rangi, she and the headmistress were more distant than she and Jianzu. Heiran was acting much friendlier than she'd expected, but Kyoshi looked down and noticed that the woman had been pacing trails in the dusty floor. Rangi often did that when she was upset. I'll help in any way I can, Kyoshi said, her throat feeling suddenly parched, her tonsils tucked in the back of her tongue, causing her words to catch in her mouth. Sorry, that's my doing, Heiran said with a gentle laugh. I dried the air out of this room for an exercise. Please sit. There were 2 silk cushions borrowed from the meditation chamber on the floor. Kyoshi was horrified at the finery thrown on the dirt ground, but she took a position across from Heiran anyway. She was keenly aware of Jianzu standing behind her, watching like a bird of prey. We perform this test on newborns in the Fire Nation to see if they're capable of firebending, Heiran said. We have to know about our children quick, as you can imagine, or else they risk burning the neighborhood down. It was a joke, but it made Kyoshi more nervous. What do I have to do? Very little. Heiran reached into a pouch and pulled out what appeared to be a small ball of tinder. This is shredded birch bark and cotton mixed with some special oils. Yeah, this is shredded birch bark and cotton mixed with some special oils. She fluffed the material with her fingers until it was wispy and cloud-like. You just need to breathe and feel your inner heat. If the tinder lights, you're a firebender. And therefore the Avatar. You're certain this will work? Heiran raised an eyebrow. Newborns, Kyoshi. It's essentially impossible for a true firebender not to make some indication with this method. Now hush. I need to get a little closer to you. She held the tinder puff under Kyoshi's nose, as if she was trying to revive her with smelling salts. Relax and breathe, Kyoshi. Don't put effort into it. Your natural fire, your source of life, is enough. Breathe. Kyoshi tried to do as she was told. She could feel strands of cotton tickling her lips. She took a deep She took in deep lungfuls of air, over and over. I'll help you along, Heiran said after 2 minutes without results. The air around them grew hotter, much hotter. Trickles of sweat ran down Kyoshi's face, drying out before they reached her chin. She was desperately thirsty again. Just a tiny spark. Heiran sounded like she was pleading now. I've done most of the work. Let loose. The slightest push. That's all I'm asking for. Your thumb on the scale. Kyoshi tried for 10 minutes straight before she collapsed forward, coughing and hacking. Heiran crumbled the tinder in her fist. A puff of smoke drifted from between her fingers. It takes children, babies, a few seconds at most under these conditions, she said to Jianzu. Her voice was unreadable. Kyoshi looked up at the two masters. I don't understand, she said. Didn't Yoon already pass this test? Yeah, they come from the breath. All right. Kyoshi looked up at the two masters. I don't understand, she said. Didn't Yoon already pass this test? Jianzu didn't answer. He turned around and stormed out of the room, slamming his fists into the frame as he left. The earthbending disc stacked by the door exploded into dust. Someone had seen Kyoshi coming and going from her new hiding place in the secondary library, and ratted her out. There was no other way Yoon would have found her, curled up beside a medicine chest that had over 100 little drawers, each carved with the name of a different herb or tincture. Yoon sat down on the floor across from her, leaning his head against the wall. He scanned over the labels next to her head. It feels like way too many of these are cures for baldness, he said. Despite herself, Kyoshi snorted. Yoon tugged on the strand of his own brown hair, perhaps thinking ahead to the day he'd have to join the air nomads for airbending training at the northern or southern temple. They wouldn't force him to shave it off, but Kyoshi knew he liked to honor other people's traditions, and he'd still be good looking anyway. But then maybe he would never get the chance, Kyoshi thought miserably. Maybe it would be stolen from him by a petty thief who'd buried into his house under the guise of being his friend. He seemed to pick up on her swell of self-hatred. Kyoshi, I'm sorry, he said. I know you never meant for this to happen. Rengi doesn't. Saying it out loud made her feel ungrateful for his forgiveness. She could count on news. Rengi doesn't. Saying it out loud made her feel ungrateful for his forgiveness. Oh. Hold on just a second. to do something real quick. There we go. Okay. Okay. Saying it out loud made her feel ungrateful for his forgiveness. She could count on Yoon's easygoing nature and inability to hold a grudge. But if Rangi truly believed Kyoshi had wronged them, then there was no hope. It was clear. Kyoshi needed both of them in order to feel whole. She wanted her paired set of friends put back into its original place, before the earthquake had knocked everything off the shelf. This state of not knowing they were trapped in was a plane of spiritual punishment, separating them from their old lives like a sheet of ice over a lake. Rangi will come around, Yoon said. She's a person of faith, you know, a true believer. It's hard for someone like her to deal with uncertainty. You have to be a little patient with her. He cut himself and twisted his lips. What is it? Kyoshi said. Nothing. I was just acting like Sifu for a second there. The smile faded from his face. Yoon plunked the back of his head against the wall at the thought of Jianzu. It's him I'm really worried about. That seemed backward. The student anxious about the well-being of the teacher. I didn't realize it when I first met Sifu, but determining who should train the Avatar and how is a cutthroat business. Yoon said. You'd think the masters of the world are these benevolent, selfless old men and women, but it turns out that some of them simply want to use the Avatar's power and reputation to profit themselves. Jianzu had told her something similar in the infirmary, that whoever taught the Avatar held immense influence over the world. Kyoshi regretted what she'd said to Kelsang the day before. He might have had reasons for wanting her to be the Avatar, but material gain was certainly not one of them. It's especially bad in the Earth Kingdom, Yoon went on. We call the prominent elders sages, but they're not true spiritual leaders like in the Fire Nation. They're more like powerful officials with all the politicking they do. He held up his hands, comparing his clean one to the one stained with ink during the battle with Tagaka. The color still hadn't faded from his skin. That's partly why Sifu and I have been working hard so. But that's partly why Sifu and I had been working so hard, he said. The more good we do for the four nations, the less chance that another sage tries to take me away from him. I don't think I could handle having a different master. They would never be as wise or as dedicated as Sifu. Kyoshi looked at his darkened hand and wondered if she could hold him down. Kyoshi looked at his darkened hand and wondered if she couldn't hold him down and scrub the ink off his skin. What would happen if the work you've done... What would happen to the work you've done if she couldn't finish the thought? She couldn't finish the thought out loud. If it wasn't you, if it was me... Yoon took a deep breath. Yoon took a deep, agonized breath. Hold on, let me just go. I'm adjusting myself. Yeah, Ian took a deep, agonized breath. I think nearly every treaty and peace agreement Sifu and I brokered would become null and void. I've made so many unwritten judgments too. If people found out that it wasn't the Avatar who'd presided over their dispute, and only some street urchin from Makapu, they would never abide by the outcome. Superb, Kyoshi thought. She could be responsible for the breakdown of law and order around the world and the separation of Yoon and his teacher. And the separation of Yoon from his teacher. That was the worst prospect of all. For as long as she'd known him, Yoon had staunchly refused to talk about his blood relations. But the reverent way he looked at Jianzu, despite any arguments or bouts of harsh discipline, made it very clear he had no one else. Jianzu had both his mentor and his family. Kyoshi knew what it was like to founder alone in the dark, grasping for edges that were too far away, without a mother or father to extend a hand and pull you to safety. The pain of having no value to anyone, nothing to trade for food or warmth or a loving embrace. Maybe that was why she and Yoon got along so well. But they differed, though. Where they differed, though, was how long they wallowed in sadness. Yoon sniffed the air, and his gaze wandered until it landed on a porcelain bowl resting on top of the chest. It was filled with dried flower petals and cedar shavings. "Are those fire lilies?" he said, a wide, knowing grin spreading across his face. Kyoshi blushed beet red. "Stop it," she said. "That's right," Yoon said. "The Ember Island tourism minister brought a bunch when he visited 2 weeks ago. I can't believe you simply shred the flowers once they dry out. I guess nothing goes to waste in this house." "Stop it! Knock it off!" Kyoshi snapped. But it was too hard keeping the corners of her lips from curling upward. "Knock what off?" he said, enjoying her reaction. "I'm just commenting on a fragrance I've come to particularly enjoy." It was an inside reference that only the two of them shared. Ranky didn't know. She hadn't been there in the gifting room 8 months ago, while Kyoshi arranged a vast quantity of fire lilies sent by an admiral in the Fire Navy, one of Heiran's friends. Yoon had spent the afternoon watching Kyoshi work, against every scrap of her better judgment. She allowed him to lie down on the floor and rest his head in her lap, while she plucked deformed leaves and trimmed stems to the right length. Had anyone caught the two of them like that, there would have been a scandal not even the Avatar could have recovered from. That day, entranced by Yoon's upside-down features, dappled with the flower petals she teasingly sprinkled over his face, she had almost leaned down and kissed him, and he knew it. But he'd almost reached up and kissed her. Because he'd almost reached up and kissed her. They never spoke of it afterward, the shared impulse that had nearly crashed both of their carriages. It was too, well, they each had their duties. It was a good way to put it. Yeah, it was too, well, they each had their duties was a good way to put it. That moment did not fit anywhere among that moment did not fit yeah, that moment did not fit anywhere among their responsibilities. But since then, whenever the two of them were in the presence of fire lilies, Yoon's, ar- Yoon's eyes would dart toward the flowers repeatedly until he was sure Kyoshi noticed. She would try unsuccessfully to keep a straight face, the heat coloring her neck, he'd sigh as if to mourn what could have been. Today was no different. Today was no different. Damn, I'm scandalized. Damn, man. That is quite the scandal right there. Oh, yeah, definitely. Alright. Today was no different. With a wistful blush on his own cheeks, Yoon stared at her until her defenses broke and she let out a giggle through her nose. There's that beautiful smile, he said. He pressed his heels into the floor, sliding up against the rock, and straightened his rumpled shirt. Kyoshi, trust me when I say this. If it turns out not to be me, I'll be glad it's you. He might have been the one person in the world who thought so. Kyoshi had to marvel at his forbearance. Yeah, Kyoshi had to marvel at his forbearance. Her fears were unfounded. Yoon could still look at her and see a friend instead of an usurper. Yeah, Yoon could still look at her and see Yoon could still look at her and see a friend instead of an usurper. She would have believed in him more. She should have believed in him more. No, it's usurper. Oh, okay. Okay, let me say it again. Now that I know the correct way to say it. Thank you. Her fears were unfounded. Yeah. Her fears were unfounded. Yoon could still look at her and see a friend instead of a usurper. She should have believed in him more. Or late, Yoon said. I was supposed to find you and bring you to Sifu. He has he said he has something fun planned for us this afternoon. I can't, she said, without I can't, she said, out of ingrained habit. I have work. He raised his he raised his brows at her. No offense, Kyushi, but I think you've pretty much been fired. Now get off that maybe Avatar rear of yours. We're going on a trip. And that is the end of that chapter. All right, on to the next chapter. All right, this is a sort of long one. Not long like 30 pages long, but it's like, I think 15 pages. But yeah. Okay, the next chapter is called The Spirit. And by reading, skimming ahead, I think. Ah. Oh, no. Cat's not here. Okay. Hold on just 1 second. There we go. But yeah, skimming through the first 2 pages of this, of this, um, of this chapter, I feel like it's gonna be very exciting. You know, the title of the chapter is called The Spirit, so you can logically deduce what this chapter might be about. Anyways, I won't give too much spoilers because I don't even know any, except for keywords that I've read. Okay. So, the next chapter is called The Spirit. The Spirit. Master Kelsang needs more time to heal, Jianzu said over his shoulder. In the meantime, hold on. I just needed to get some water in. Master Kelsang needs more time to heal, Jianzu said over his shoulder. In the meanwhile, we can perform a spiritual exercise that might shed some light on our situation. Think of it as a little Earthbender's only outing. He adjusted Peng Peng's course. The breeze blowing her tufts of fur in a new direction. The group was the unusual combination of Jianzu, Yoon, and Kyoshi. They borrowed Kelsing's bison, leaving Rangi and Heiran behind. There should have been nothing wrong with the concept of three Earth Kingdom natives bonding over their shared nationality, but Kyoshi found it unnerving. Without Rangi or her mother present, it felt like they were sneaking away to do something illicit. She glanced at the terrain below. By her best reckoning, they were somewhere near the Shishan Mountains that ran along the southeastern edge of the continent, the same ones that the Earth King incorrectly considered a sufficient barrier to waterborne threats like the pirates of the Eastern Sea. Kyoshi still wasn't fully comfortable addressing Jianzu in a casual manner, so it fell on Yoon to ask what the point of this trip was. Sifu, he said cautiously, as an idea forming in his head. Is the reason we're going to a remote area because we are trying to invoke the Avatar state? His master scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. What's the Avatar state? Kyoshi whispered to Yoon. Jianzu's sharp ears intercepted her question. It's a tool, he said, and a defense mechanism, a higher state of being designed to empower the current Avatar with the skills and knowledge of all the past ones. It allows for the summoning of vast cosmic energies and nearly impossible feats of bending. That sounded definitive enough. Why wouldn't they try it? That sounded definitive enough. Why wouldn't they try it after the failures they'd suffered? But if the Avatar can't maintain conscious control over so much power, then their bending can go berserk, causing elemental destruction on a grand scale. Jianzu said. They turn into a human natural disaster. The first time Karuk practiced entering the Avatar state, we went to a small uninhabited atoll, so we wouldn't hurt anyone. Well, what happened? Yoon said. Well, after his eyes stopped glowing, he came down from floating 20 feet in the air inside a sphere of water. The island wasn't there anymore, Jianzu said. The rest of us survived by the skin of our teeth. So no, we're not triggering the Avatar state. I would shudder to think what would happen if an Earth Avatar started hurling land masses left and right with abandon. He took them lower. That's what I thought, because I skimmed and I saw Avatar state. I was like, oh, they're gonna do the Avatar state. But Jianzu's very wise and very smart. And he's like, nah, I'm not gonna teach you the Avatar state. Hell fucking no. Fooled. Yeah. So I guess they're maybe gonna try and just touch in with your spirituality. Okay. He took them lower. The westward side of the mountain ridge was dotted with empty mining settlements. Scapes of brown dust spread from the operating sites like an infection, eating up the tree line and displacing the natural vegetation. Kyoshi looked for signs that the land was growing back, but the scars were permanent. The wild grasses kept a strict cordon around the areas touched by the miners. Jianzu set Peng Peng down for a landing in the center of a mud-walled hamlet. Whoever originally earthbent the structures into shape had been so sloppy that it seemed intentional, as if to remind the occupants that they weren't going to stay long. Kyoshi was surprised they didn't cause any further collapses by jumping. Yeah, Kyoshi was surprised they didn't cause any further collapses by jumping down from the bison. This is an important locus of earth and spiritual energy, Jianzu said. Yoon dug his toe into the dust as he surveyed their surroundings. It looks more like a wasteland. It's both. We're here to commune with a particular spirit roused by its slumber by the devastation. I'm hoping one of you can ease its suffering. But talking with spirits is no guarantee, Yoon said. I've read the past avatars who've had trouble with it. And then there's people like Master Kelsey who have been able to communicate with spirits effortlessly at times. I didn't say the method was perfect, Jianzu snapped. If it was, I'd have used it on you long ago. Yoon frowned and bit back more questions. Kyoshi was glad that he shared her apprehension at the very least. The desolate town was eerie, with the bones of a once living thing. But on the other hand, she was slightly comforted by the knowledge that this would all be over soon. She knew nothing about spirits. In her opinion, being spiritual simply meant acknowledging the power of forces you couldn't see and coming to terms with the fact that you didn't have control over every aspect of your life. The rituals of food and incense placed at sacred shrines were gestures to that worldview. Nothing more, nothing less. The stories about strange translucent animals and talking plants might have come true, but they weren't for her. The Avatar was the bridge between the human world and the spirit world, and whatever chance Jianzu had in mind would settle the matter. Yoon would glow with energy or some other final proof, and she would lie there inert, listening for sounds she couldn't hear. After leaving Peng Peng with some dried oats to chew, they walked to the slope of the mountain on a tiny path that ran along a gouged out sluice. Yeah, I think it's sluice. Sluice. Yeah, sluice. Yeah. After leaving Ping Ping with some dried oats to chew, they walked up the slope of a mountain on a tiny path that ran alongside a gouged out sluice canal. It was steep going, and Yoon remembered there was a faster way to climb. You know I can make a lift and... Don't, Jianzu said. Eventually, the incline revealed a large terrace carved into the mountain. It was bigger than the entire settlement below and had been constructed with more care. It was perfectly level, and empty post holes indicated that it had once held some very heavy equipment. Go sit in the middle, Jianzu told them. Kyoshi felt the same prickle on the back of her neck as she did when stepping onto the iceberg with Tagaka. It made little sense, seeing how she was surrounded by her native element. Come on, Yoon said to her. Let's get this over with. He seemed to have a better understanding of how this might escalate. She followed him to the center of the terrace. It's not the solstice, but it is almost twilight, Jianzu said. The time of day when spiritual activity is at its highest. I will guide you two into meditation. Yoon, help her if she needs it. Kyoshi had never meditated before. She didn't know which leg you folded over the other or how your hands were supposed to touch. Fists pressed together or thumb and forefinger. You've basically got it, Yoon said after they sat down. Tuck your tailbone in a bit more Tuck your tailbone in a bit more, and don't hunch your shoulders. He stayed facing her, say, talking up his own pose not too far off. She could have reached out and poked him. Jianzu. Okay. Jianzu not proceeded. Jianzu produced a small brassiere. Brassiere? I think it's brassiere. Because it's not brassiere. That's a bra. Brazier, I think. Brazier. Okay. 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 Good night. Good night. Okay. Alright. Sorry, I got like stuff in my throat. Not the COVID though. I've been fine this entire time. Jianzu produced a small brazier. Yeah, it was brazier. Jianzu produced a small brazier and a stick of incense, which she placed between them. Someone help me light this with fire bending, he said. They stared at him blankly. It was worth a shot, Jianzu said. He lit the incense with a precious sulfur match and backed away until he reached the edge of the terrace, positioned like the high mark of a sundial. The air took on a sweet medicinal note. Both of you, close your eyes and don't open them, Jianzu said. Let go of your energy. Let it spill from you. I want to let the spirit get a taste of it, so to speak, so it knows it can come forth. Kyoshi didn't know how to control her energy, but if Jianzu was telling her to throw away the idea of containing herself, to stop minimizing the space she took up, to let herself grow and rise to her full dimensions, it felt wonderful. The next inhalation she made seemed to go on forever, drawing back from a reservoir inside her that had no end. Her sense of balance ran wild, the pool of the earth coming from each and every direction in turn. She swayed within the stillness of her own body. Her eyelids were a theater of the blank. The rasping noise came from the mountain, the sound of millstones with no grain between them. Sorry, I got distracted. Okay. A rasping noise came from the mountain, the sound of millstones with no grain between them. Don't open your eyes, Jianzu said softly. Hear sounds, smell smells. Take note of them naturally and let them pass, without opening your eyes. The breeze picked up for a moment, dispersing the incense smoke, and the time it took to settle back down, Kyoshi thought she detected a whiff of something damp, almost fungal. It wasn't so atrocious as it was familiar. Familiar to whom? She thought, giggling silently as the incense took over again. You know what would be funny? She said. If it was, neither of us. Kyoshi. Yoon. Uh, Kyoshi. Kyoshi. Yoon said. His voice sounded slurred. I need to tell you something. Not gonna lie, that would be funny. It would be fucking hilarious. And kind of tragic, too. Kyoshi, Yoon said. His voice sounded slurred. I need to tell you something important. Me and you. She tried to speak again, but her tongue was too big for it. Jianzu hadn't told them to shut up yet. That was weird. Jianzu was master shut up. Oh yeah. Still doesn't know it. That was weird. Jianzu was master shut up. Was he okay? She had to check if he was okay. If he was okay. It was her duty as a member of his household. She disobeyed and peeked. Yoon was meditating peacefully. Had he spoken at all, or had she imagined it? She tried to turn her head toward Jianzu, but went the wrong way, looking at the mountain instead. A hole had been opened in the rock, a tunnel of pitch darkness. In its depths, a great glowing eyeball stared back at her. Her shriek caught in her throat. She tried to scramble away, but her muscles failed as if her joints had been sliced by a butcher. Nothing connected to anything. The eye floating in the mountain was the size of a wagon wheel. It had a sickly, luminescent tinge of green, a web of pulsing veins gripping it tightly from behind, giving the sphere an angry appearance, as if it would burst under its own pressure at any moment. It swiveled over to look at her futile struggle catching her attention. Yoon! Her mind screamed. He wasn't moving. His breathing was slow and labored. Jianzu was unfazed by the horrific spirit before them. Father Glowworm, he called out in greeting. A cordial, mellifluent voice rumbled from deep within the mountain, the echo concentrated by the walls of the tunnel. Architect, it's been so long. The eye darted between the three of them. What have you brought me? A question. The spirit sighed, a low, nauseating hum that Kyoshi felt in her bones. That chatty little upstart Ko. Now every human thinks they can march up to the oldest and wisest of us and demand answers. I thought you had more respect, architect. Jianzu stiffened. This is an important question. One of these children is the Avatar. I need you to tell me which one. The spirit laughed, and it felt like the earth bounced. Oh my. The physical world is in poor shape indeed. You do know I'll need their blood. Kyoshi thrashed back and forth, but whatever Jianzu had drugged them with had rendered her flailing into mere twitches of movement, her cries into halting breaths. Yoon's eyes opened, but only by the smallest degree. I know, Jianzu said. I've read Karuk's private journals, but you've tangled with many of the Avatar's past lives. I must have the unerring judgment of a great... Hold on. Let me catch myself again. There we go. I know, Jianzu said. I've read Karuk's private journals, but you've tangled with many of the Avatar's past lives. I must have the unerring, I'm pretty sure it's unerring. Hold on, now I'm unsure. Yeah. But, yeah. I must have the unerring judgment of a great and ancient spirit such as yourself. A carpet of slime spilled from the hole into the mountain, flowing over the terrace. It was the same moldy, rotting green as the eye, and it reached toward Yoon and Kyoshi in tendrils. The shadows of fingers against a curtain. There was a scraping noise against the stone floor. It came from pointed flecks of debris floating in the wetness. Yeah, it came from pointed flecks of debris floating in the wetness. In the wetness. Bone yellow roots and crowns. The slime was full of human teeth. Kyoshi was so scared that she wanted to die. Her heart, her lungs, her stomach had been turned into instruments of torture, clawing and biting against each other like frenzied animals. She wanted to reach the void, pass into oblivion, anything to end this terror. As the ooze reached for her knee, Yoon opened his eyes. Summoning his strength, he lunged at Kyoshi, shoving her away, throwing his body between her and the spirit. He choked in surprise at the rasping slime shot underneath his clothing. A damp, crimson spot bloomed on the back of his shirt. Kyoshi's foot lay next to the brazier of incense, a meager contribution after what Yoon did. But she screamed with her whole body this time instead of her vocal cords, and kicked at the little bronze vessel. The burning ash landed on the slime and frizzled out. The plasm nearest them shrank from the heat, and the spirit hissed angrily. Yoon struggled to his knees beside her. I'm surprised you can move, Jianzu said to him, more impressed than anything else. Poison training, Yoon spat through clenched jaws. With Sifu and Mach, remember? Or did you forget every darker exercise you put me through? They were distracted from the slime They were distracted from the Slimer grouping, wrapping around Kyoshi's ankle until it latched on tight and ground away, sanding her skin off with the rows of teeth. Her blood formed clouds inside the living mucus. Oh, that's disgusting. Yeah. Yeah, they were distracted from the Slimer grouping, wrapping around Kyoshi's ankles, wrapping around Kyoshi's ankle until it latched on tight and ground away, sanding her skin off with the rows of teeth. Her blood formed clouds inside the living mucus. Yoon saw her writhe in pain. He grabbed her hand and tried to pull her away from the spirit. Their palms clasped hard enough that Kyoshi felt their bones roll over each other. But the tendril held her fast, tasting her, lapping at her wound. "It's this one," the spirit said. "The girl. She's the Avatar." Kyoshi and Yoon were looking at each other. Kyoshi and Yoon were looking at each other, and the eye when it happened, when she saw Yoon's spirit break inside him. He'd been lying to her with his body and his smile and his words this whole time. He'd thought it was him, truly and utterly. He'd never once entertained the notion that it might not be him. Any kindness and warmth he'd shown to Kyoshi since the iceberg hadn't been signs of his acceptance. They'd been layers of armor that he'd fiercely assembled to protect himself. And that armor had failed, piece by piece. Kyoshi saw the only Yoon she'd ever known. The boy who was the Avatar, slow and flake into nothingness. His mantle had been stripped from his shoulders, and the shape underneath was merely wind. He let her go. Jianzu was on top of them in a flash. He sliced at the branch of slime with a sharp, precise little wall, and using the care of his own hands, dragged Kyoshi away to safety. Just Kyoshi. He laid her on the ground and turned around, but it was too late. The spirit slime reared into the air between them and Yoon. Yeah. The spirit slime reared into the air between them and Yoon, a snake guarding its prey. The eyeball in the tunnel swelled with fury. "You call me forth, ask for my boon, and then assault me?" Its roar nearly shattered the bones in Kyoshi's ears. "Yoon," she tried to shout. "Run! Fight! Save yourself!" The Avatar. It never meant anything. Jianzu took an earthbending stance, cautiously settling his feet the way a swordsman might slowly go for his blade. "I couldn't risk you taking your revenge on Karuk's reincarnation. You had your blood, Father Glowworm. Your price has been paid. I'm raising it!" Instead of attacking the two of them, the tendril wrapped around Yoon from neck to hip. His face was as pale as clay. He wouldn't move his limbs. Every fear Kyoshi had of taking from him what he treasured most had come to pass in a thundering instant. There was only one more thing left for him to lose. "No," Kyoshi sobbed. "Please, no." The spirit pulled, and Yoon flew backward into the tunnel, disappearing into darkness. As Jianzu punched his fist upward to seal the passage shut once more with solid mountain, Kyoshi found her voice again. She screamed pure fire. The flame shot out of her mouth like the rage of a dragon, In a single explosive burst, it doused the terrace and rendered swaths of lingering ooze and blackened, flaking char. Yeah, I know, right? I think she's gonna save Yoon. If they don't and they kill him off, I will feel so bad. Like, poor Yoon. Like, he finds out he's not the Avatar, and then he gets... Yeah. Hopefully not. Okay. It doused the terrace and rendered swaths of lingering ooze into blackened, flaking char, but the tunnel was closed. Her fire washed impotently against the mountainside, until it petered out entirely. Kyoshi rumbled to her feet, barely able to see past her sticky eyelids. The inside of her mouth was blistered. She could sense Jianzu's presence in front of her, looming. "I'm sorry," he said. "This could have been avoided if you had..." She surged forward and tackled him off the edge of the terrace. The trip down this time was worse than the iceberg. Kyoshi lost her grip on Jianzu the instant her shoulder smashed into a withered, hardened tree root. She stumbled wildly, tail over tea kettle, and came to a stop at the bottom of the slope. Ignoring the pain, she looked around for Jianzu. He wasn't to be found in the thin shrubs surrounding the base of the mountain. She snapped her head upward at the sound of stone moving. The earthbending master descended casually, stepping down a flight of stairs he created himself. Where a more orthodox bender would simply raise a solid platform from the ground, Jianzu gathered planks of stone and assembled them at will beneath his feet, using the same technique he'd reached Tadaka's ships with. It looked like the earth itself was bowing to him, prostrating under his immense power. Kyoshi spotted a boulder behind him, large enough for her to lift and root her feet into the ground. She pulled it toward them, not caring that she was almost in its path. Jianzu didn't bother turning his head. He reached behind him with one arm, and the room-sized rock split into... He reached behind him with one arm, and the room-sized rock split along its grain, letting him pass through the gap. The two half-spears kept going and narrowly missed clipping Kyoshi as well. She forced down a yelp as they collided with the ground behind her. Jianzu looked at her with the same thoughtful expression he once reserved for Yoon. "I'll have to teach you to do more than simply go big," he said. Kyoshi tried the only other basic tactic she knew, breaking the opponent's foundation. She aimed her intent at the base of his stairs. She'd take them out along with a huge chunk of slope. But after rooting herself again and throwing the mother of all arrow punches at the mountainside, the only movement she got was a geyser of dust. The stairs barely trembled. She tried again and again. Jianzu was taking deeper stances now, spiraling his arms in time with hers, and suddenly she knew why. He was raiding her, smothering each movement of the earth she attempted, nulling her out. She was a child pulling on a door an adult was holding closed. Jianzu stopped right in front of her, his platform raising him up so that he was eye level with her. Yeah, because she was tall as fuck. Yeah, Jianzu stopped right in front of her, his platform raising him up so that he was eye level with her. Aside from the dust on his clothes, he could have been leaving a meeting. Aside from the dust on his clothes, he could have been leaving a meeting in his house. She'd been unable to touch him in the slightest. Okay, I'm not going to read ahead. Okay. Kyoshi, he said in a warmth that made her sick to her stomach. You are the Avatar. Don't you know what that means? The responsibility that you now have? He ran a hand through his hair and bared his teeth like he regretted what kind of bushes he'd planted in his garden. Kyoshi, I'm not a fool and neither are you. We're not going to pretend you'll ever truly forgive me for what happened here. What I am asking you to do is weigh our loss against the future of the world. Don't let Yoon's sacrifice be in vain. Embrace your duty and let me teach you. Yoon's sacrifice? Our loss? Her teeth crushed fresh wounds into her lips. She thought she'd known hate before. Hate had been hollowness inside her, a dull ache that she'd been forced to cradle as she stumbled through the alleys of Yokia, dizzy with hunger and sickness. Hate had been reserved for her own flesh and blood. But now she understood. True hatred was knife-edged and certain. A scale that begged for perfect balance. Yoon lay on one side of the fulcrum. Her only responsibility in this life, as far as she was concerned, was to even the weight. She swore to herself, one way or another, she was going to do what Jianzu looked like when he did lose everything he held dear. Kyoshi hurled a fire fist, a move she knew nothing about, but whatever firebending she had in her had been used up. It came out as a normal punch, stopping short of his face. Seeing her so desperate to harm him cracked his mask of serenity. He frowned an ugly frown and clenched his fingers. 2 small discs of stone slammed into Kyoshi's wrists from left and right. It happened so fast she didn't have time to flinch. The stones shaped themselves around her and joined them together in front of her body, forming a set of thick shackles. They were as smug as a bone doctor's splint and as unbreakable as iron. The bands of rock rose into the air, taking her with them. Her shoulders clicked painfully under her own weight, and she writhed like an insect caught on sticky paper, madly kicking her feet without purchase. Jianzu held her like that, a carcass for inspection, before slamming her back down. The stone shackles merged with the ground, and she struggled on all fours. He had forced her into a full no kowtow, a student's posture of submission to their master. Had you the essentials of earthbending, you could free yourself, Jianzu said. You've gone neglected long enough, Kyoshi. You're weak. Her palm sunk deeper into the ground the more she tried to resist. There was no denying that he was right. She was weak. Too weak to fight him the way she needed to. The distance between them was simply too great. So much wasted time, Jianzu said. I could have taught you sooner, if only I hadn't been distracted by that little swindler. That he wasn't done being cruel to Yoon was a final kick to her gut. It was incomprehensible. She couldn't keep the tears from flowing down her face. How could you say that? She screamed. He worshipped you and you used him. You think I used him? You think I used him? Jianzu's voice grew dangerously quiet. You think I profited him? You think I profited from him somehow? Let me give you your first lesson. The same one I gave you. He stamped his foot, and a thick layer of soil clamped itself over Kyoshi's mouth. A muzzle with no holes for her to breathe. She began to choke on her own element, her lungs clogging with grit. Jianzu swept his arm behind him in a wide, encompassing arc. Out there is an entire nation crammed full of corrupt, incompetent people who will try to use the Avatar for their own purposes. Buffoons who call themselves sages when all it takes in the Earth Kingdom is having the right connections and paying enough gold to plaster such a title on your brow. The map of Kyoshi's vision curled in on itself. Her toes gouged furrows in the dirt, trying to push her body toward the air. The pounding in her head threatened to burst her skull. Without my influence, you turn into nothing more than a traveling peddler of favors, flopping here and there with your decisions, squandering your authority on petty boons and handouts, Jianzu said, unconcerned that she was losing consciousness before his eyes. You'd end up a living party trick, a bender who could shoot water and breathe fire and spit useless advice, girl who paints the walls a pretty color while the house rots at its foundations. She barely made out Jianzu crouching down beside her, bringing his lips closer to her. I have dedicated my life to making sure the next Avatar won't be used in such a manner, he whispered. And despite your every attempt to fight me, I will dedicate my life to you, Kyoshi. He suddenly ripped away the earthen gag. The rush of air into her lungs felt like knives. She collapsed onto her chest, her hands freed but useless. For several minutes she lay there, despising each pathetic gulp she took. Each time she tried to stand out but could not. Each time she tried to stand but could not. Finally, she heaved herself to her feet. Only to see Jianzu backing away from her, glancing over her head. A gale of wind washed them in dust and desiccated leaves. Kelsing landed his glider on the rope and slid down on his. Kelsing landed his glider on the slope and slid down on his feet the rest of the way, relieved as she was to see him. Kyoshi knew right away that he shouldn't have come. His wounds were reopened, staining his bandages red. He traveled too far on his own without his bison. The journey by glider would have been arduous for an airbender at full health. Kels, how'd you find us? How did you find us? Jianzu said. Yeah, me too. How did you find us? Jianzu said. Kelsing closed the wings on his staff. They'd been repaired so hastily that they wouldn't fold completely into the wood lumps of that they wouldn't fold completely into the wood. lumps of glue sticking out of the seams. He leaned heavily on it for support, staring hard at Jianzu the whole time. You left a map out on your desk. I thought I lacked my study. You did. Jianzu's composure broke fully for the first time today. Really, Cal? He shouted. You think so little of me these days that you panicked when I took the Avatar on a trip by myself and broke into my room. I can't trust the people closest to me anymore. I can't trust the people closest to me anymore? Kyoshi wanted to run to Kelsang, hide behind his robes, and sob like a child. But fear had closed her throat and glued her feet. She felt like the slightest word from her could prove to be a spark thrown on the oil. She didn't have anything to say, though. Kelsang took one look at her trembling form and grimaced. He stepped carefully between her and Jianzu, leveling his staff at his old friend. It looked much more like a weapon than a crutch now. No one in the house could tell me where you went, Rangi and Heiran included, he said to Jianzu. You're saying I had no reason to be suspicious? Where's Yoon? Kelsang, Jianzu said, thrusting his hands toward Kyoshi, trying to get his friend to see the bigger picture. That girl is the Avatar. I saw her firebend with my own eyes. Your hunch was correct. After so many years, we found the Avatar. Kelsang hitched, his body processing the revelation. But if Jianzu thought he could distract the monk to his advantage, he was mistaken. Where is Yoon? He repeated. Dead, Jianzu said, giving up the ruse. We tried to commune with the spirit, but it went berserk. It took him. I'm sorry. No! Kyoshi shrieked. She couldn't let that go. She couldn't let him twist what had happened. You fed us to it. You threw Yoon to that spirit like meat to a wolf. You murdered him. You're right to be upset, Kyoshi, Jianzu said softly. I got so carried away with finding the Avatar that I lost my pupil. Yoon's death is my fault. I'll never forgive myself for this accident. He wasn't wailing with sorrow. That would have been too obvious an act. He kept the face that most people knew, the stoic, plain-speaking teacher. This was a game to him. With Kelsang as the piece in the center, Kyoshi was gripped by a flesh bout of despair. If the monk believed his friend, the adult, the man of good repute, overheard, Jianzu's crime would be buried along with Yoon. She needn't have worried. Kyoshi? Kelsang said, never taking his staff off Jianzu. Stay behind me. Jianzu rolled his eyes, his ploy having failed. I don't know what's going on here, Kelsang said, but I'm taking Kyoshi and we're leaving. He staggered, still weak from his injuries. She caught him by the shoulders and tried to keep him upright. The only way they could stay stable was by holding onto each other. Look at the two of you, Jianzu said. What you're doing is you're coming home with me. Neither of you are in any shape to argue. Kelsang felt Kyoshi tremble through her hand on his back, felt her fear. He ignored his own pain and drew up his full height. You will have nothing to do with Kyoshi for the remainder of your life, he said. You are no longer fit to serve the Avatar. The cut landed deep on Jianzhu. Where will you go? He roared, frenzied and frothing. Where? The air temples? The abbots will hand her back to me before you can finish telling your story. Have you forgotten how far you've fallen in disgrace with them? Didn't Tagaka jog your memory? Kelsing tensed into a solid carving of himself. The grain of his staff squeaked from how tightly he held it. I know everyone in the 4 nations who could possibly help you, Jianzhu said. I put out the message, and every lawman, every sage, every official will be tripping over their own feet to hunt you down on my behalf. Being the Avatar will not protect her from me. Kyoshi, run! Kelsang shouted. He pushed her away and leaped at Jianzhu, bringing his staff down to create a gale of wind. Jianzhu brought Earth up to meet him, but they weren't fighting the same fight. Kelsang meant to blast his friend away, to knock the madness out of him, to overwhelm him with the least amount of harm done, in the way of all air nomads. Jianzhu shaved off a razor flint no longer than an inch sharp and thin enough to pass through the wind without resistance and slice at where his victim was exposed and vulnerable. A spurt of blood came from the side of Kelsing's neck, from a finger-length cut so clean and precise it was almost elegant. Jianzhu's expression flickered with a sadness that was deeper and truer than what he'd given to Yoon as he watched his friend fall. Kelsang collapsed on the ground, his head bouncing lifelessly off the hard, packed earth. Those were the last things Kyoshi saw before the white glow behind her eyes took over her entire being. And that is the end of that chapter. Oh my god. I didn't think we were gonna have 2 deaths in this book, but I guess we're here now. I don't know how to feel about it. I am very sad for both Yoon and maybe Kelsang. Fuck. Yeah. Right? Oh, fuck. Okay. I will read one more chapter. Now Kyoshi will bring... Yeah, she was gonna bring the hard justice. Hard justice back. Alright. I'm gonna read one more chapter. Alright. The next chapter... I'm like trying to read ahead. Okay. This chapter is called The Inheritance. The Inheritance. One time, when she was about 10 or thereabouts, a traveling fireworks vendor came to Hiokia. The village elders, in an unusual fit of decadence, paid him to put out a show celebrating the end of the first harvest. Families packed the square, gazing at the booming, crackling explosions racing across the night sky. Kyoshi did not see the display. She lay on the floor of someone's tool shed, twisted by fever. The morning after, the heat in her school forced her awake at dawn. She staggered around the outskirts of town, seeking to cool air, and found a field where the vendor set his explosives the night before. The ground was scorched and pitted, utterly ravaged by a fiend born no nat by a fiend born of no natural element. It was covered in a layer of ash and upturned rocks, water creeping in slow, black rivulets. Rivulets? I think it's rivulets. Let me check. Rivulets. Rivulets. Rivulet. Okay. Water creeping in slow, black rivulets. Yeah, water creeping in slow, black rivulets. The wind smelling like rotten eggs and urine. She remembered now being terrified that she'd catch blame for the destruction. She remembered now being sadly terrified that she'd catch blame for the destruction. She'd run away, but not before scuffing her footprints off the path she'd taken. When Kyoshi regained her vision, she thought for a moment she'd been thrown back in time to that unreal, violated landscape. The trees were gone behind her, snapped at their trunks and torn by their roots to expose damp clumps of soil. Before her, it was as if some great hand had tried to sweep away the mountainside in a convulsion of fear and shame. Deep rips crisscrossed the stone like claws. The hilltops had been pushed over, the traces of landslides pouring down from their crests. Kyoshi had the vague notion that she was up too high. Kyoshi had the vague notion that she was too high up, and she couldn't see Kelsing anywhere. She had wiped away his existence. There was an animal howl floating on the wind. The scream of rosin on warped strings. It came for her. Kyoshi dropped to the ground and lay there, her face wet with tears. She pressed her forehead to the earth, and her useless cries echoed back in her face. Her fingers closed around the dust, sifting for what she'd lost. It was her fault. It was all her fault. She pushed Kelsing away instead of listening to him, allowed cowardice to rule her thoughts and actions, and now the source of light in her life was gone. Yeah, rip everyone. And now the source of light in her life was gone. She had nothing left, not even the air in her lungs. The heaving sobs coursing through her body wouldn't allow her to breathe. She felt like she was going to drown above water, a fate she would have accepted gladly, a just punishment for an unwanted girl who'd squandered her second chance. Kelsang, a miraculous, loving father, conjured from thin air, and she'd cursed him with death and ruin. There was a tremor in the distance. The rumble around a certain spot was sinking, parting. Someone had staked the havoc she'd wreaked in the Avatar state by burying deep down in the ground, in the earth. Now he was tumbling back to the surface, ready to claim his property. Kyoshi scrambled to her feet in a blind, wild panic. She tried to run in the direction they'd come, stumbling past landmarks she'd prayed she remembered correctly. The baked ruins of the mining villages were so similar that their crumbling appearance... the baked ruins of the mining villages were so similar in their crumbling appearance that for a second she thought she was caught in a loop. But then, right as her legs were about to give out, she found Ping Ping waiting where they'd left her. The bison took a whiff of Kyoshi and bellowed mournfully, rearing on her back 4 legs before crashing down hard enough to shake the dirt. Kyoshi understood. Maybe Ping Ping had felt her spiritual connection with Kelsang dissipate, or maybe Kyoshi simply smelled of his blood. At least Ping Ping's safe. Yeah, Ping Ping is safe. He's gone, she cried. He's gone and he's not coming back. We have to leave now. Ping Ping stopped thrashing, though she looked no less upset. She allowed Kyoshi to climb on her back, using fistfuls of fur as a ladder, and soared into the air in the direction of home without being told. Yokuya, Kyoshi corrected herself. Not home. Never again home. Yokuya. She stayed back in the passenger's saddle. She was unwilling to straddle Ping Ping's withers in Kelsing's place, and the bison didn't need guidance for the return journey. From high up in the sky, she could see dark, rain-filled clouds approaching over the ocean in the opposite direction. If they flew fast enough, they could reach Yokuya before meeting the storm. Please hurry, she shouted, hoping Ping Ping would understand her desperation. They managed to strand Jianzu in the mountains, but the man's presence felt so close behind, as if all he needed to do was reach his arm out for her and feel his hand clamping down on her shoulder. That same year, she'd caught sick and suffered through the fireworks. Kelsang had returned to the village. He looked askance at the farmer, who swore that Kyoshi had been well taken care of with the money she'd left him. He looked askance at the farmer, who'd swore that Kyoshi had been taken well taken care of with the money he'd left behind. The weight she'd lost and her pallid skin told a different story. Afterward, Kelsang promised that he'd never leave her for so long again. But Kyoshi had long forgotten about any nights she'd spent ill without medicine. She'd been more concerned with a new kite-flying craze that had been taken hold of the village children. For weeks, brightly colored paper diamonds and dragons and gold wings had hypnotized her from the sky, dancing on the wind. Not surprisingly, she hadn't the supplies or guidance to make one of her own. Kelsing noticed her staring longingly at the kites dotting the sky while they shared a meal outside. He whispered an idea in her ear. Together, they scavenged and spliced enough rope for him to tie one end around his waist. That afternoon, he took off soaring from his glider, while Kyoshi held the other end from below. They laughed so loud they could hear each other across the great heights. For her, he was the biggest, fastest, best kite in the whole world. She had misjudged the weather. The first drops of rain pattered on her cheeks, waking her from her slumber of exhaustion. She and Ping Ping still had some ways to go when it quickly became a torrent that blotted out the sun. They narrowly managed to get down to Yokuya in time to avoid the lightning spread. They narrowly managed to get down to Yokuya in time to avoid the lightning spreading its fingers across the sky. They arrived at the mansion. Kyoshi jumped off. Kyoshi jumped off Ping Ping near the stables and landed ankle deep in mud. She waded through the blinding rain to the house. The staff and the guests had been driven inside to their quarters. The ride had given her time to think, and she concluded that every decision from here on out was easy. An an inevitability, an an inevitability. Now this is an inevitability. I said it right the first time, but I feel like I didn't say it right. And now the way it's spelled, like saying it, it's just very confusing, even though it shouldn't be. And maybe it's the "and" part in the beginning of the fucking sentence that it's really throwing me off. An inevitability. Yeah, it's really throwing me off. And yeah, an inevitability she would follow into the darkness. The only person who could, the only person who could have made her falter was waiting inside the servants' entrance for her, under the archway of the wall. Ranky looked like she had confined herself to this area the entire day. She had worn out a groove of the floor with pacing back and forth. Kyoshi, where were you? Ranky said, a scowl on her face, from having been left in the dark for so long. What happened? Where are the others? Kyoshi told her everything about the powerful, terrible spirit that had identified Kyoshi as the Avatar, about the way Jianzu had offered Yoon up as a sacrifice and murdered Kelsang when he came to rescue them. She even included how she entered the Avatar state. Ranky rumbled backward until she knocked her head against the support beam. What? She whispered. That's not... What? That's what happened, Kyoshi said. She dripped rainwater on the floor. Each flip, another precious second lost. I have to go. I can't stay here. Ranky started pacing again, running her fingers through the ends of her hair, which had fallen loose. There's got to be a misunderstanding. An explanation. You said there was a spirit? It must have played tricks on your mind. That's been known to happen. Or maybe you simply got confused. Master Jianzu can't have. He wouldn't. She watched Rangi attempt to will a different reality into existence. It was the same trap Kyoshi had fallen into the day Kelsang told her she might be the Avatar. We've got to get to the bottom of this, Rangi said. When Jianzu gets home, we'll make him explain himself. We'll find out what really happened to Yoon and Master Kelsang. Rangi! They're dead! I have to go! Throughout the journey back, Kyoshi had been thinking only about the shards of her life buried on that mountain. She'd forgotten that there was still one more piece, and Ranki's stunned silence let her know she'd lost that too. Kyoshi pushed past her without saying goodbye and headed to her room. Let me plug in my thing because it's almost gonna get to a low point, and I don't want that. There we go. Kyoshi pushed past her without saying goodbye and headed to her room. It was easy to fill a sack with her clothes. She barely had any. She was going to leave everything on her shelf behind, but the thought of Kelsang made her grab the clay turtle and throw that item in. The item that gave her pause was a beautiful. The item that gave her pause was the beautiful green battle outfit that she'd worn on the iceberg, and was now hanging on her wall. For some reason, Jianzu had let her keep it in her room. The thought of using a gift from him made her insides clench, but she would need armor like that where she was going. A protective shell. She took it down, hastily rolled it up, and stuffed it in the sack. The leather journal went on top of it. The leather journal went on top. She was truly grateful she'd never given in to her urge to destroy the book. In the past, it may have been incriminating evidence, but now it was a war plan. Tucking the bundle under one arm, she stooped down, grabbed the handle of her trunk with the other, and dragged it out of the hallway. The corners of the trunk screeched as they gouged out a trail in the polished wooden floors. She supposed the reason that no one stopped her was that they were scared. She saw the hems of robes disappearing around corners, frightened whispers behind closed doors as she passed. The guardsmen, she remembered, had been decimated on the iceberg, and there had always been an undercurrent of suspicion in the way the other servants looked at her. Now her apparent behavior must have pushed it over the edge into fear. She looked like a swamp ghost dripping with the water she drowned in. She could only imagine what terrors her face held. Each fork in the hallway brought another flash of raw, saw-bladed pain to her heart, as if she were one of the target dummies in the courtyard, collecting jagged arrows with her body. Where was it? Where? Let me say that again, because I lost my place. Each fork in the hallway brought another flash of raw, saw-bladed pain to her heart, as if she were one of the target dummies in the courtyard, collecting jagged arrows with her body. The route she'd taken in her daily life unfolded down the corridors of the mansion, leading inevitably over and over again to the dead. The way to Yoon's room, the one area he never let her clean, flustered over his privacy, the path to the little nook where Kelsang would meditate when the weather was too harsh, the grass where the three of them had spat watermelon seeds, only to run away when Atsumui yelled at them for making a mess. She would never tread these lines again. She would never arrive to see Yoon and Kelsang's smiling faces at the end of her steps. By design, Kyoshi took the long way past the wood chopping station. The splitting maw was there, the wedge buried in the block. The splitting maw was there, the wedge buried in the block. Kyoshi placed her bag between her teeth and picked up the maw with her free hand. The entire block came with it, stuck to the blade, and she smashed the whole agglomeration against the wall until the heavy stool was freed from the wood. Wait, hold on. Oh, okay. Let me say it again, just so I know what happened. By design, Kyoshi took the long way past the wood chopping station. The splitting maw was there. The wedge buried in the block. Kyoshi placed her bag between her teeth, picked up the maw with her free hand. The entire block came with it, stuck to the blade, so she smashed the whole agglomeration against the wall, minutes until the heavy tool was freed from the wood. She kept walking. Outside, the rain had doubled. The interval between lightning and thunder was non-existent. She dropped her bag and flung the heavy wooden trunk in front of her. She dropped her bag and flung the heavy wooden trunk in front of her. It slid in the mud before coming to a stop. The chest had been a focal point of her anger in the past, collecting the flows of her hatred like the water barrels positioned under the gutters of the house. It had been left behind in Yokiya, like her, by the people who relegated her into a starving, desperate, unloved creature for so many years before Kelsane came into her life. Her parents would have to take a lower place on the shelf for now. She had something new to focus on. Hold on. Okay. Another lightning flash illuminated which side the iron lock was on. Raising the maw high above her head with both hands, she swung it down, aiming for the weakest point. The wedge of the maw bounced off the metal. The trunk sank deeper into the mud. She struck it again, and again, and again. The thunder and rain drowned out her senses, leaving her with nothing but the painful vibrations rebounding up the haft of the maw into her hands. She struck again and felt a crunch. Rather than the lock breaking, the trunk had splintered where the metal was fastened to the wood, but it was open. Kyoshi tossed the maw aside and raised the creaking lid. Inside were two ornate metal war fans, the color of gold, alloyed with bronze. The weapons were packed in a softer wood frame that held them open, while protecting them from rough treatment, like the short. Let me say that again. Inside were two ornate metal fans, the color of gold and alloyed. Inside were two ornate metal war fans, the color of gold, alloyed with bronze. The weapons were packed in a softer wood frame that held them open, while protecting them from rough treatment like the sort she'd just doled out. A headdress came out of the same material, rested in between them. It complemented the fans by mounting smaller versions of them on a band, forming a semicircular crest at the forehead. Lastly, there was a plain leather pouch with a case that she knew contained makeup. A lot of makeup. She snatched each item from its moorings. The headdress and the fans were much sturdier than they appeared. They were meant to be worn and wielded in combat. Those are her things! Her things! Yes, those are her iconic things. My eye got super itchy all of a sudden. Okay. Yeah, those are things. Hell yeah. Okay. The headdress and the fans were much sturdier than they appeared. They were meant to be worn and wielded in combat, after all. They and the pouch went inside her bag. The trunk served no further purpose and would be left in the mud. With that, Kyoshi was finished. She was taken aback at how completely and utterly finished she was. How little she had put on display, how much she'd lost. Like the black like the black night sky around the burst of a firework. She'd held on too hard to a treasure that might she'd held too hard to a treasure that might have been shaped like a home and a family, only to discover that her touch had dissolved it entirely. She wiped her eyes with her forearm and ran around the edge of the mansion, slipping and falling in the rain at least twice, and reached the stables. There was a shock waiting for her. Rangi was busy securing bedrolls, tents, and other bales of supplies to Ping Ping's saddle. She looked up at Kyoshi from under the hood of her rain cloak. Let me guess. She packed over the downpour. She shouted over the downpour, pointed out several waterproof baskets and sacks of grain. You didn't pack any food, did you? She reached down, grasped Kyoshi's hand, and pulled her onto Ping Ping's back. Then she hopped into the driver's seat and took up the reins. We'll have to fly low and head southwest out of the storm. Kyoshi's lump was a thought. Kyoshi's throat was a solid lump. Why are you doing this? I have no idea what's going on right now. Rangi said over her shoulder. She flicked the rain off her brow. Her face underneath looked like she was heading into combat. But I'm not going to let you ride off on your own and die in the storm. You won't last an hour without help. Kyoshi nodded, stricken dumb with gratitude to Rangi. For Rangi. She pleaded with the spirits that it wasn't a final cruel trick. The form of her friend sitting before her. She maintained a safe distance as to not dispel the precious vision. The firebender snapped Ping Ping's reins with authority. Up, girl! Rangi shouted. Yip, yip! And that is the end of that chapter. Go back soon. Of course, you know. Same energy. Hell yeah. Same exact energy. Fuck, dude. That was fucking great and insane and sad. Fuck, dude. I can't believe Yoon and Kelsang are dead. That bums me the fuck out. Because they were really cool. They were really cool. Alright. But thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.